Welcome to the Hollywood Community Church Sermon Podcast. My name is Justin, and I have the honor of serving as pastor to the wonderful people of Hollywood Community Church. And I want to begin by explaining what it is that you're listening to. So if you're listening to this is the first episode we're releasing on this audio podcast. And really what this is going to be about is recording our Sunday sermons and providing an audio version of it. So what's most often going to take place is you're going to see what we're preaching on Sundays shared with you in an audio format so that if you miss a Sunday, you're out of town, and you prefer to listen rather than watch on YouTube, maybe you want to listen while you're on the car or you're doing some errands, you want to be able to listen. This podcast is going to be able to provide a format for that so you can keep along with us. And so this podcast also, from time to time, will feature some what we might call a bonus episode that might be about a topic that lends itself better to an audio format. Maybe there's something that comes up. We couldn't have the time on a Sunday to bring up that particular content. So we might say, hey, on the podcast, we're going to share a little bit more about this. Or there are just some topics that lend themselves better to this kind of audio format. And so really today falls into all of those categories. What we're going to be looking at is a continuation of our Proverbs series. So if you've been with us at Hollywood Community Church the past few months over the summer of 2025, we've been going through the first 5 chapters of the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs 5 ends with this conversation about temptation. Proverbs 5 is all about temptation. How do we fight temptation? And it's specifically describing sexual temptation. And so we talked about in the first section of Proverbs 5 about how temptation is deceptive. It offers us satisfaction to our deepest desires with a counterfeit version of what God really wants for us. And then the second section, we just talked about how it describes how one of the best ways we fight temptation is by putting boundaries up in our lives to keep us from that source of temptation. Well, the end of Proverbs 5, I mentioned this past Sunday, it's a little spicy, and it gets into some content that is really, really important for married couples to consider for their marriages. And so we as a church, we want to be able to teach the whole counsel of God. We don't shrink back from all of what the scripture has to say. And Proverbs 5 gives some really important wisdom and warnings about adultery, about sexual temptation. And so I'm going to be speaking in this podcast, assuming you, the listener, are a married person. Now, if you're not married, you're more than welcome to keep listening, but just know that the subject matter is really for married couples. So maybe you're preparing for marriage, or you're a husband, a wife. This is really for you. And so just before I read the passage, let me just introduce what we're about to read with this context. God wants for you to have a beautiful, faithful marriage. This is what he wants for you. He wants for you to finish your marriage well. It's really easy to start your marriage well. It's easy on your wedding day in your suit, your tuxedo that you rented, and the white dress. It's easy on that day to be faithful. It is difficult. It requires a lot of work and patience and growth and forgiveness to finish a marriage well and to end well and to arrive at the end of your time on this earth having fulfilled your marriage vows, what you exchanged on that wedding day. And Proverbs 5 offers us some really important instruction for how we can stay faithful to our spouses and love them in the exclusive manner that God wants for us to love them. So I want to walk through this passage, Proverbs 5. We'll pick it up in verse 15, and we're just going to kind of work through the passage. I want to make a few observations, truths from this passage that are being taught here, and then I want to get very practical. And the hope is that this is going to foster some conversations among husbands and wives. Maybe this is an area where you don't talk very much about this, or it's a source of contention. My hope and my prayer is that this would open up some helpful conversation. So Proverbs 5, we're going to get right into it and look at what Solomon instructs his son. He says this: drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers. Let me again remind those of us who are listening. Maybe you haven't been following along with us on Sundays in this series, but this section of Proverbs, it's written from the standpoint of a father giving instruction to his son. And so that's the way the pronouns are listed. It's fatherly language to their son. Now, the wisdom behind all of this, these wisdom principles are universal. They apply to men and women. They apply to young and old. But here, the language is specifically addressing men. And so right in these opening verses that we just looked at, there's a metaphor that's being used that I want to clarify. Maybe you caught it and it sounded kind of confusing to you. He tells his son, listen, drink water from your own cistern. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have a cistern. I'm not using cisterns on a regular basis. And so maybe that's a confusing concept. But I want you to think about a time and an age when there is no public utility. There's no running water in your home. And so the way that you would collect water is you would have a cistern. You'd have a place, a basin where you would store water. Or maybe you have a well that you dug and you can access and be able to get clean drinking water from. In the metaphor, what Solomon is saying to his son is that your wife is the source of water that God has provided you for this desire that you have in you for sexual intimacy and fulfillment. And so he says to his son, I want you to drink water from your cistern, flowing water from your own well. And then he says, my son, think about it. Should your springs, should your water source be scattered abroad? In other words, he's saying, son, how would you feel if your source of water, your wife, started sharing that water with anyone and everyone on the street? How would you feel if those streams of water are scattered abroad? This is kind of like a do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He's warning against adultery. He's warning his son about this character he calls the forbidden woman, the adulteress who's seeking to tempt him to be unfaithful to his wife. And he's saying, son, I want you to drink water from your own cistern. How would you feel if your wife was giving herself sexually in that intimate way with others? You wouldn't want that. So then you make sure that you are faithful to her in this way. Verse 17, he says, let them be for yourself alone. So this is the idea here. It's using this metaphor and imagery about the way that spouses are to be committed to one another, the way that they are to have exclusive relational intimacy in this way. Let's continue. Verse 18. Verse 18 says, let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? So here he's calling his son to delight and rejoice in the wife that God has given him. Just to say it more in a way that's broader for husbands and wives, the call here is for spouses, wives to their husbands, husbands to their wives, to rejoice, to take delight in, to take pleasure in the gift that God has provided them in their spouse. He uses language about the woman's body and compares her. He uses these metaphors that, again, they seem strange to us. A lovely deer, a graceful doe. I would never compare my wife to a deer, just quite frankly. But in the biblical language and in their culture, this is just painting this picture of a husband's delight in his wife, having eyes for her, seeing and beholding her and seeing ultimate beauty in her, having this covenant with his eyes, making this exclusive decision. She is God's gift to me, and I'm going to treasure and behold her. And so he uses this interesting contrast. He says, always be intoxicated in your wife's love. Why should you be intoxicated with a forbidden woman? That word intoxicated, it means to be swept away with, for yourself to be overcome by. And so this is this invitation for spouses to be lost in each other, to love each other, to be enraptured by each other. And this is what's being called here. He says, why should you do that with the forbidden woman? This is what he says next, verse 21. This is kind of the conclusion of this section in Proverbs 5. He says, "For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he is held fast in the cords of his sin. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray." This is really a conclusion and a recap of many of the themes that we've already uncovered in Proverbs 5. I encourage you to go back and reread the whole chapter. But he's saying, consider the cost of this. This is a huge deal. You might think that what you're doing behind closed doors is a secret that no one's going to find out, but God knows. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him. The eyes of the Lord can see what you're doing. It is not hidden from his sight. And you need to know that this is costly. Adultery, other forms of sexual sin, they bring death. And so he issues this warning. So now that we've walked through those verses, I want to just make some observations. What are those general wisdom principles that we can extract from this text that apply to men and women in the context of marriage? Number one, I want you to take note of this. Make sure you listen closely. See this in the text. Number one, sex is a good gift from God to be enjoyed exclusively in the context of marriage. I'm going to say that again. From this passage, we can learn that sex is a good gift from God to be enjoyed exclusively in the context of marriage. Now, to be quite frank, Christians have not done the best job of communicating this about sex. Christians have famously done I wouldn't say good job, but they've spent a lot of time talking about all of the bad things about sex. There is this reputation that Christians might even have a low view of sex or be anti-sex. And what's clear from this text is God is not anti-sex. He created it. It was his idea. It's a good gift that he has given to people to enjoy in the context of marriage. And God's creation of it, then it continues on by this command in Genesis chapter 2, where he tells the man and the woman, be fruitful and multiply. Come together, you are one flesh. And so if God created it, it's this good gift. It is to be enjoyed. And Proverbs 5 is filled with this language of the delight and wonder and the satisfaction that comes from a healthy and loving sexual, intimate relationship with your spouse. Solomon is telling his son, I want you to enjoy and delight in your wife. He uses provocative language that we might blush at. He says, let her breasts fill you with delight. Right? They don't teach us that in Sunday school when we're in our, inappropriately so. We're not teaching that lesson to 10-year-olds. This is for married couples. Let her breasts fill you with delight. Delight in your spouse. Take note of their body. Have this wonder and gratitude to the Lord for it. One of the best descriptions and succinct pictures of this principle I've come across is in Tim Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage. He has a chapter on the topic of sex in marriage. And here's how he describes it. I want to share a couple of sentences from the book that really drill down on this point, that sex is a good gift from God to married couples. He says, sex is perhaps the most powerful God-created way to help you give your entire self to another human being. Sex is God's way for saying to another person, I belong completely to you. When sex is used within marriage to nurture and deepen that union, it becomes a way of experiencing the joy of giving and receiving whole life love. Marriage is this ultimate form of, or sex is this ultimate form of vulnerability in marriage. And this idea of being intimate with your spouse, of course, it's going to change over the course of your married life. This idea that sex is a good gift to be enjoyed exclusively in marriage, this is true at all times, but this practically evolves over time. It's not always the honeymoon phase, and so please don't misunderstand what I'm trying to articulate. Over time, things change. I think of the dynamics of when you have young children and you welcome babies into your home. That changes things, okay? It takes time. At the same time, I would say that physical intimacy is a key indicator of how healthy a marriage is doing overall. Typically, a healthy sex life goes along with a healthy marriage. Again, there's exceptions, there's nuance, but if there is brokenness in that area of a marriage relationship, it's an indicator that there are other things going on as well that are keeping that form of physical intimacy from being able to be expressed and enjoyed. And so sex is this expression of love the husband and the wife have for each other. And so the Bible, it doesn't have a low view of sex. It has a very high view of sex. Our world has cheapened sex. Hookup culture has cheapened sex. And this idea of an exclusive gift, it's a gift to be enjoyed exclusively in the context of marriage. That word exclusive doesn't cheapen it, it heightens it. The common illustration I use often is that sex is like fire. Sex is like fire. Fire in your fireplace is awesome. Fire in your fireplace keeps the house warm when it's cold outside. Fire in your fireplace is beautiful to look at. Fire in your fireplace, you can roast marshmallows over it. It's wonderful. Paints a beautiful scene. Fire in your living room, however, brings destruction. Fire in your living room will take your house down. And here's the idea. Sex within the context and protection and safety of an exclusive marriage relationship that's committed, that is loving, that is not just physically naked, but emotionally, spiritually, financially naked. Total transparency, total commitment. That when sex is experienced there, it's awesome and wonderful. It's the gift given to its proper setting. But when sex is taken out of that context, when it's taken out of the fireplace, so to speak, it can bring a whole lot of damage and pain into people's lives. It's not God's design and it is not his intention. So just to recap, Proverbs 5 is articulating that sex, it's a good gift from God to be enjoyed exclusively in the context of marriage. Number 2, second observation from this text is that when it comes to fighting sexual temptation, one of the best forms of defense is developing a good offense. I'll say that again. When it comes to fighting sexual temptation, one of the best forms of defense, that is defense against giving into sexual sin, is developing a good offense. Let me explain what I mean by that by giving a sports analogy. In football, in hockey, in soccer, a lot of these sports that require possession of a ball in order to score, one of the common phrases you'll hear is, hey, one of the best ways that we can help our defense is for our offense to be really strong. If you have the ball and you are working to score, it makes it difficult for your enemy to score. Proverbs 5, it gives this metaphor about drinking water from your own cistern, enjoying and delighting in the wife of your youth in the context of fighting temptation as a way to say, listen, if you're thirsty, God has provided you a source of nourishment to satisfy that thirst. But if you aren't developing and cultivating that, if you're neglecting that, you need to know you will be more susceptible to the enemy's attack. If you are too thirsty, you will be more likely to look for other sources of nourishment that God does not want for you to look to. It's funny, we even use that language now. If you hear people talking, we use the language of being thirsty. When people are being too thirsty to describe, they're looking for affirmation. They're trying to get people to get their attention. And this is so true. This is so true in so many areas of our lives. And so he says, drink water from your cistern. This is very complementary to what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7. Listen to the Apostle Paul's instruction to the church at Corinth. He says, the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Now let me pause there. Now, if we did just end the verse right there, this would sound cruel. This would sound like, wait a minute, the wife doesn't have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Mind you, this is where the first century Roman culture would have ended the verse. That's where that would end. Paul is saying here, the wife doesn't have authority over her own body. The husband has authority over her body. But then listen to what he says next. He says, likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. So make sure we complete the thought. The idea is this mutual surrender. The wife surrendering herself to her husband, the husband surrendering himself to his wife in this beautiful reciprocal giving of each other. Sex is painted in the scriptures, according to God's design, to not be about getting something from someone, but giving something to someone. It is an act and expression of love. So Paul continues. He says after, the husband belongs to the wife belongs to the husband. He says, don't deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time so that you might devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, be sexually intimate again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Again, Paul is articulating this same principle from Proverbs chapter 5. Play good defense against committing sexual sin, against adultery, against pornography. Play good defense by cultivating a good offense. Do not deprive one another in that way for long periods of time. Now, I admit this is a sensitive topic. You might be hearing this. Maybe you're just one spouse listening to this and you're thinking of a million exceptions as to why your situation is complicated. This doesn't apply to you. Maybe you are listening with your spouse and there's like this tension in the room right now. Okay. I don't apologize for that tension. This is an important conversation. But here's what I'd say. I admit this is not a counseling session. I don't know your particular story. You may be listening to this and asking a bunch of questions like, what about this or what about that? What if I'm thinking about sex in this way, but my spouse isn't? What I'm trying to do right here is to give the biblical ideal and offer some steps to get there. I want to point us to what Scripture is saying, give us practical guidelines on how we might get there. This is something that you shouldn't feel embarrassed praying about and asking for God's help. You shouldn't feel wrong or embarrassed or strange talking to the Lord about this. And you also shouldn't feel embarrassed talking to a trusted, wise counselor on this in confidence. And with a topic like this, the wisdom of Scripture is, men, you talk to another man about this, someone trusted, a believer who's wise, a leader in your life. Women, you talk to another woman about this. Under no circumstances do you get advice, from someone who is not of the same sex as you. And so this is a conversation we should be having and be describing and talking about. But I did want to just make that note that I understand there's a lot of nuance here. There's so many particular circumstances that we can't get into every single one. But what I would say is there is hope for you and your relationship, and you can pray about this and talk to a trusted person about this. Let me wrap up by offering 3 landmines to avoid. We've talked very positively so far about what we're called to do. We're called to see sex as this gift from God to be enjoyed exclusively in marriage. And then we've talked about how it's something that we should develop a good, healthy sexual intimacy as a way of guarding us against sexual temptation. Not as the main reason you have sex. The main reason you have sex with your spouse is not so that you don't fail in this way. The main reason is for the sake of love, because you care about them, and it's an expression of that exclusive love that you only express that kind of love to your spouse and no one else on the planet. That's the main reason. But a byproduct of that is when you are drinking water from your own cistern, women, when you're drinking water from your own cistern, men, in that exclusive way, you won't thirst for other cisterns to look to. Okay, here are the landmines, all right? And I think these are going to get practical, and I have a feeling that for many of you, you're going to be like, okay, I relate to that. So landmine number 1 to avoid. Poor or complete absence of communication about sex. There's a lot of couples that it just becomes like a Cold War, and you don't bring it up. It's taboo. You can't talk about it. It's off the table. And what I would just say, that if this is where you're at, where you just can't even talk about it, it's typically because there's a lot of brokenness and shame and regret in this area. And what I would say is it's really critical for husbands and wives to be able to have healthy conversations where you listen to each other about this topic, where you share with one another, where it doesn't turn into an argument that you're trying to win, but that you're just sharing where you are it's really critical that you be honest with each other, because sex is about giving more than it is about getting. You need to know what's happening in the mind and the heart of your spouse. So even if you're someone who you're frustrated with how your spouse has handled sex, and maybe they're doing one of these other landmines we're about to get into, what I would say is don't punish them by forbidding the conversation. This is an important conversation to be able to have, because here's what happens when you don't talk about it. What happens when you don't talk about it is you just ruminate, and you allow this to build momentum in your thoughts, and you start getting bitterness to take root, and you start fighting with them in your mind and having, disputes with them, made up disputes with the made up version of them in your mind. And you can actually make the bitterness and the frustration and anger worse than it actually is. And so it's really critical that you learn the skill, develop the skill, maybe take baby steps and start somewhere. Start small, but start talking about this area. What bothers you, what fears you have, what frustrates you, how you feel when this happens or this doesn't happen. Like, those should be conversations in the safety of marriage, in the exclusivity of marriage, that we can share with our spouse. Landmine number two is when you disconnect sexual intimacy from personal, social, and emotional intimacy. This is a huge landmine. When you disconnect sexual intimacy from personal, social, emotional, relational intimacy. Your sexual intimacy with your spouse ought to be the continuation of your loving intimacy with your spouse in every other way. Okay, sex is to be the expression and culmination of your love, not something that you make demands for. When you disconnect these two things, when you have this expectation that your spouse is supposed to meet your sexual desires, but you are not spending time with them, loving them, serving them, finding out what's happening in their life, being vulnerable with them with what's going on in your thoughts, that can send a message to your spouse that really what they are for you is just sex. Your spouse is a person. They're not a sex object. They're not someone for you to objectify. And so when we start to disconnect sexual intimacy from personal, social, emotional intimacy, we're making sex into about getting, not giving. We're making it about ourselves, self-serving. This is one of the reasons, okay, and again, this is a topic Christians don't talk about this. This is why I would say masturbation, those kinds of ways of acting by yourself, is a distortion of God's design for us. Because sexual intimacy is designed by God to require another. And to turn that into something that is self-serving, that is about getting, that is isolated from my spouse, where I actually don't need them to experience pleasure, that is working against God's design for sex. Sex is to be this culmination of the love that I have for my spouse in every other way. It's not disconnected. It's not just this need that I'm demanding from them. No, it's an expression of giving. And so if you're frustrated in your sexual relationship right now with your spouse, maybe it's because there are these other issues where you're not communicating, you're not serving, you're not caring, you're not asking how they're doing, you're not showing love and intimacy in these other categories, and yet you're still expecting sexual intimacy. And that's just incredibly disrespectful and demeaning to the other person. And so that's a huge landmine people fall into, and it only exacerbates, brings further and further pain. Number three, landmine number three, and this is kind of where we'll land the plane. It's when sex is used as a means of manipulation. Sex becomes a means of manipulation. I think of the story of Samson and Delilah in this. This is not in my notes, going off the cuff here, but it's just the story that comes to mind. Sex is used as manipulation to get what you want, or to withhold it in order to get what you want. So sex in marriage, it's not a bargaining chip. It's not how you get your way with your spouse. And so if you find yourself withholding intimacy as a way to punish them, or using intimacy in order to get what you want from them, that is not loving, that is wrong, and it ultimately comes back to love. We're getting back to the same principle we were describing in the second one, which is, this is another way of disconnecting sexual intimacy from the other forms of love, of care. And so giving yourself to another person is the design that God has for this area. It's not taking from another person. So just be mindful. If there is issues and challenges in your marriage and there's conflict, those need to be worked out. And again, there's so many nuances. Your specific situation, I have no idea what it is. But when sex becomes a means of manipulating, withholding, or giving so that you can get what you want, that's danger territory. That's using your spouse. It's not loving. And that's a landmine that causes a lot of pain and devastation. And so we don't want to do any of those things. We want to communicate. We want to connect sexual intimacy with all the other forms of intimacy and love. And we don't want to use sex as a means of manipulation. It's a overflow of love. It's care. It's self-giving. And so maybe you've heard this and something jumped out to you. Maybe one or two things from what was shared, either from the text in Proverbs, some of these larger wisdom principles that are being taught here. Maybe something really jumped out to you. And my encouragement and challenge to you is to take a step in having a conversation about this with your spouse. Have the conversation humbly. Give permission to share honestly if you've not really done a good job of communicating about this before. And let's be honest, even those of us who have the comfortability with our spouses to talk about anything, it's just a difficult conversation. It's very vulnerable. And so we need to extend a lot of grace to each other. We need to be able to let each other talk and express and ask the question, wait, am I hearing you right? Am I understanding? This is what you're saying. But if there's something that really just spoke to you and you resonated with, I really want to encourage you to speak to your spouse about it and consider what is the next step for you? What is it that you need to implement in your life or talk about and take a step forward? Because here's what I know. Married couples. Marriage is a gift. And marriage is God's design. And your marriage is given by God to paint a picture of His love for His people, His sacrificial love. And when marriage is lived out in a way that shows mutual love and service and sacrifice, and two individuals coming together to serve each other, to express intimate, exclusive love with each other, that paints a picture of the gospel. And that's what God wants for your marriage. It's what He has for you. And there's so much joy there. And so what I want to just inspire you to do is to don't give up on that. Maybe you're discouraged after listening to this and you feel like, oh my goodness, I've got 1,000 problems in this area of your life. And this only just reminded me of all of them. Here's my final word to you is don't lose heart. You can speak to the Lord about these things and God can work in your life in this important area. And so that's His desire, that we in marriage display love to each other in a way that shows His exclusive love that He has for us as His people. So I hope that this has been a helpful conversation. It's given you something to think about, maybe helps start a conversation with you and your spouse, and can be an encouragement and a resource to you in the days ahead. Now, as a church, we're about to start the book of Acts. We've finished up the first 5 chapters of Proverbs. We're moving on there. Maybe at one point we'll pick up in Proverbs 6. But for now, we're getting into the book of Acts, and I'm looking forward to that. And I'd just say if you're interested in more resources from Hollywood Community Church, would invite you to visit our website. You can find us at ourhcc.org. That's our as in O-U-R, hcc.org. And you can also find us on Instagram. Just search Hollywood Community Church, Facebook, YouTube, all those places. And you can follow along with us whenever we have resources or things going on here. And I'd just say if you've never visited us as a church, we'd invite you. We have services in Spanish, English, and French, and would invite you to join us on a Sunday here in Hollywood, Florida. But with that, I'm signing off. Take care. We'll see you next time.